viene a compartir con nosotros cómo ha sido esta transformación, su propia transformación hacia un liderazgo exitoso. Se llama Paul Walsh, él es vicepresidente de ingeniería de McAfee en Irlanda y él nos va a contar acerca de esta transformación. Él refleja esta relación entre el jefe y el colaborador, pero una relación de confianza. Así es que a este hombre que ha sido nominado en el año 2014 por Great Place to Work Irlanda como uno de los líderes que mejor refleja la relación de confianza, queremos invitarlo aquí a este escenario y recibirlo con este fuerte aplauso. Con ustedes, Paul Walsh. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
I hope you have the energy for one more presentation. I promise I won't keep you from happy hour. This is my first time in Chile, and I'm really impressed with some of your customs. I think in the last 24 hours, I've kissed more beautiful women than I have in the last 24 months. So I'm really enjoying myself. And I'm not the first Irishman to visit Chile. Back in the kind of 19th century, there were many, the O'Higginses, the McKennas, the Lynches, all great leaders. And after spending some time exploring your city yesterday, I understand why they all stayed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, oh, the clicker. Okay. A voyage. And I hope throughout this presentation you learn a little bit about leadership. I'm going to share my experiences. I'm going to hopefully help you understand more about what it takes to be a good leader. And then maybe you can go and influence the leaders in your organization. Because I think there's a bunch of standard things that leaders need to consider to be successful. So back in the 5th century, an Irish abbot called Brendan decided to embark on a voyage. He traveled from Kerry, the west coast of Ireland, up through Scotland, into the Faroe Islands, and across into Iceland and Greenland, and into North America. So he would have ended up in America 1,000 years ahead of Christopher Columbus. And he did it using local materials. He built his boat from Irish oak, Irish ash. He used cowhide and leather to strap it together. And around the 8th century, a bunch of stories appeared in over 100 manuscripts around Europe, detailing excerpts from his journey. In 1976, an explorer called Tim Severn was so taken by this story that he set to prove that it could have happened. And he built the boat, which you see here. This is Tim Severn's boat, a replica of the original Brendan voyage boat. And what he did was he used exactly the same materials, he used the same equipment and craftsmanship of the day, and recreated as best he could the craft. And he sailed all the way from Ireland on the same route and got to North America. Now, it takes an awful lot of courage to embark in a route like that. You don't know what you're going to experience. You've no idea if you'll ever come back. Back in the 5th century, navigation was fairly limited. Food preservation, there were lots and lots of risks. And I think everything you do today is some sort of a journey. My journey to this conference was a pretty straightforward one. A couple of flights, and I was here within a day. So the things that I want to focus on today are trust and success, and direction and vision. But before I start, I will just give you a little bit of background on myself. I started my career working for IBM. I then worked for Microsoft. And then more recently, I went working for a company called McAfee. I went back to my hometown of Cork in Ireland, and I set up McAfee's European headquarters. 4 years ago, McAfee was acquired by Intel. McAfee was a $2.5 billion company at the time. Intel paid $8 billion for the company, and now I work for Intel. So we're rebranding McAfee as Intel Security. So I'm undergoing a bit of change right now, coming from, I don't think a $2.5 billion company is a small company, but Intel, by way of scale, is enormous. Intel does about $1 billion of revenue a week. and it earns $1 billion profit a month. So that's quite a shift for me. And I'm hoping some of the things I've learned along the way will help me prosper in this new environment that I find myself in. Trust is a real key issue, and I believe the most important thing is self-trust. It's the very first secret of success. This is according to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And if you can't trust yourself, how do you expect other people to trust you? If you don't understand what makes you tick, and what are the beliefs and values that you hold, if you don't understand those, then how do you expect people to trust and to follow you? There's been a lot of conversations today around work-life balance, family, and your work environment. And I think it's important that you carry the same beliefs from your home environment to your work environment. There are a lot of studies and information right now talking in detail about this. But when you understand what your core values are, there's no reason why they shouldn't be the same. You shouldn't turn for work and be a completely different person. You should be the same person. You should be consistent. People should know what you stand for. And if you know who you are, you will automatically project authenticity. And that's absolutely critical for leaders today. If you look around the world and you think about who you think the great leaders are, and there have been some photographs earlier today of great leaders, all of these guys had authenticity. Having a title will give you some level of authority, but having trust will allow you to influence people, to influence your organization, to influence your environment. So I believe that leaders lead with energy, that they have to be tuned in, have a positive attitude towards the challenge that they're trying to manage. I think that they have to have the right attitude. And attitude is a choice. When you turn up for work in the morning, you can decide to bring the right attitude with you. If you have issues at home, you can leave them at home and turn up for work ready to do the job that you have to do. And the people around you will feed off that energy, that feed off that positive attitude. But if you choose to turn up and you're carrying problems with you, then that becomes a problem for your leadership, for people's ability to trust you, and for your ability to get tasks done. And similarly, if you go home with a whole pile of problems, you're going to create a whole load of issues for yourself at home. So choosing the attitude you bring to any environment is a choice you absolutely have. And I think it's important that one considers that. And this last saying is the only easy day was yesterday. It's a military saying. And I kind of think about it a lot, because if I felt that yesterday was the toughest day I ever was going to put down, and every other day was going to be easy, I'm not sure I'd turn up. We expect that we progress and we change and we build our trust. We understand ourselves and we understand our people and our environment in a better way. I was thinking about, trust, and we've talked, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it today, but I haven't seen anyone put a definition up there. So I've been searching for a good definition for quite some time. And I think there's three things to trust that I think one needs to consider. First is risk. If you trust somebody, you are taking a risk. You have a dependence on them. You have a vulnerability, because you're trusting them to do something that they don't have to do, and you're expecting a positive outcome. So every time you trust somebody, you're vulnerable. And that's what makes it difficult to trust. And you need to be consistent in how you behave so that people will trust you in return. So there's lots of examples of this, and the one I always think about is you have the knife thrower. The guy with blindfolded knife thrower, and you have a circular wheel and a lady strapped to the wheel, and it's going around in circles. The knife thrower is blindly throwing knives, and they're getting closer and closer to her head. And you think, that's a perfect example of trust. There's risk there because he might miss, or he might actually hit her and not miss. That she has a dependence on him to be an absolute expert in what he does, to not to hit her, and then there's an expectation of a positive outcome. all leaders need to have a vision. And I think a vision needs to be a big thing. You have to dream big when you have a vision. And there's a parable of the bricklayers. The 3 bricklayers, and they're building a wall. And the first bricklayer is asked, what are you doing? And he said, I'm laying bricks. Second guy is asked the same question. He said, well, I'm providing for my family. I'm trying to earn enough money to feed them. And the third guy says that I have a very strong faith, and my church matters a great deal to me. I'm building a cathedral. So when you think about it, which one of these guys would you like to have on your team? The guy who's just doing his job and taking a paycheck, or the guy who's helping to fulfill the vision of building a cathedral? I think a vision is like a magnet. It draws people towards it. It takes you from the past, and it commits you to the future. I'm sure many of you have read Alice in Wonderland when you were younger, and I'm sure some of you read it to your children today. I think it's a wonderful book, and I'm a great fan. And there's a piece or a point in the journey where Alice ends up in the forest, and there's 2 paths. She doesn't know which way to go. So the Cheshire Cat is there, and she asks him please to tell her which way she ought to go. And the Cheshire Cat says, it depends a great deal on where you want to get to. And Alice says, I don't much care. Then the Cheshire Cat says, it doesn't really matter which way you go. Because if you keep going, you're going to go somewhere. And I'm sure we're all been in organizations where we have teams who are marching. They're going to get somewhere. It might not be where you want them to get to. It might not be in line with your vision, but they will get there. So setting a direction and being in a position as a leader to influence your organization when they come to a choice. It's a crossroads. It's a fork in the road. They need to know where they're headed so they can make the right decisions along the way. I'm kind of reminded of a story. Paul Walsh was the CEO of Intel up to quite recently. He retired 2 years ago. And I was at a meeting, and he spoke at it, and he talked about, someone asked him, what was the biggest mistake you ever made when you were president or CEO and president of Intel? And he said that throughout his career, he trusted his gut. We talked about it in inner feeling, right? And yeah, I think everybody has an instinct. And you know sometimes if something's instinctively wrong, there are times when you struggle to find the information to prove it, but you know it's wrong. And he said that he got through his entire career by trusting his gut. And Apple came to him. They had a new product. It was a phone. They wanted Intel to provide the processor. He asked his finance guys and his manufacturing people to go away and research this, to figure out, could Intel provide a processor at a price point that would make it profitable for them to do so? They came back and said the numbers didn't add up and it wasn't a good deal. He said, no, go look at it again, and they came back with the same information. So his gut told him this was a good thing to do. This was a good business decision, but the information told him different. So what he did, he said no. Now, Apple went to Samsung. They still today provide the processor for the Apple phones. Apple phone has been a phenomenal success. Intel is still chasing the phone market. It was his biggest mistake, and he did not trust his gut. So there's something there. It might always be tangible, but I think it's important that we pay attention to it. Whenever I start out on a journey where, and my teams are, I have 2 jobs. One is I manage the Intel security site in Ireland. We have 380 people. And in my day job is I'm part of a global engineering organization, and I have teams scattered around the world. So I travel quite a bit. And every time I'm asked to take on a new project or a new organization or a new team, I have to, in my mind, convince myself that I'm going to leave things in better shape than when I started. I need to understand where the team is at today. I need to figure out where I want it to go. And then that becomes my vision. It becomes the direction I set for the organization. So a strong desire to do something and leave it in better position, better place than I started. The other thing I always try to do is I try to hire smarter people than me. Now, luckily for me, that's quite an easy thing to do. But there are many managers I've come across over the years who are afraid of people who they think are smarter, are more qualified, are more skilled, are more trained. And they won't hire them because they feel they pose a threat. That is a huge mistake. Because if you can surround yourself with really, really smart people, you will nearly always be successful. Because they will challenge you. They will build an organization around you that has an increased level of standards. They will be innovative. And they will drive the success of the organization to a level you wouldn't believe. Always want to build something better. And when it comes to a vision, you need to communicate effectively. So clarity is absolutely essential. And there have been many times when I've seen great visions very poorly communicated. And the team just don't get it. A leader has to be crystal clear when it comes to communicating the message down. And what happens in organizations is the first layer of management might get the message, and then their job is to filter it down. But we all know when you take a message and you pass it through several layers, by the time it gets to the bottom layer, it's a completely different message. So I think it's very, very important that people focus in on clarity. I've got some images here of some sports people, and I'm very interested in rugby there. That's Ireland, by the way. We're European champions, which is great for such a small country. And I look at how sports teams develop, and I look at how some of the best teams continue to be at the top. So this picture is of Alex Ferguson, who was a Manchester United coach. Manchester United were probably the most successful team in Britain, one of the biggest teams in the world still today. He managed the team for over 20 years, from success to success. And football teams have a lifespan. A good successful team might survive for maybe 3, 4, even 5 years. To be at the top for 20 years means you have to continuously bring in new players and change things. And I use this as an example when I talk about when to make change. Because he makes the change when the team are at their most successful. It's counterintuitive to most people. I see lots of organizations make change when the numbers slide, when revenue falls, when things go bad. It's too late then. You've missed the boat. So great managers and great leaders will take the tough decisions when they're at their most successful. And that's why they continue to be successful. This whole issue of managing and leading. I think people become managers because they're subject matter experts. They're really, really good at what they do. They have tremendous potential and they fulfill all their objectives. And they continue to manage the team that they might have worked with, using that subject matter experience and getting new skills and managing people along the way. When it comes to leadership, you have to actually think about it. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. You have to think about what does it mean and what do I do have to become a great leader. And one of the things that I believe strongly in is you need to have a lack of personal ambition. Now that might sound a little strange, but over the years, a lot of people have come to me and said, you know, what do I need to do to get to the next level? What do I need to do to get the promotion that I want, to get to the next grade, you know, to get, you know, an increased salary or a higher bonus? And I say, I think that's the wrong question to be asking. Because your focus should be on your team. For me, the question should be, what do I need to do to make my team more successful? And if that's your approach, then you will be successful, your team will be successful, and the personal ambition is set aside. I've never met a leader who led a really successful organization who didn't learn and grow from that experience and didn't get rewarded. Deepak Chopra says, if you pursue excellence and ignore success, pursue excellence, ignore success, and if you are successful, excellent, you will be successful. And you know, I think that's a very core message, and it resonates very well with me. And the other thing that I think about here is, and I say this to all kind of new managers, is to make yourself redundant. to essentially do yourself out of a job. And it scares the hell out of most people when they hear it first time around, because they think if they succeed, you'll be showing them the door and they no longer have a role in your organization. But in fact, the opposite is true. The more they strive to do themselves out of a job, the more they strive to make themselves redundant, the greater their likelihood of being successful. And because they will create opportunities for themselves, they will innovate innovate in a way that they will create new processes, structures, products, because they're always looking to, if that's their goal, they will do fantastic things to achieve it. They will get rewarded for that, and they will find a whole new set of opportunities in front of them. Great leaders. Nelson Mandela. I think he's an incredible leader, but I heard a really interesting story about him recently. It's when he was in Robben Island, and he used to get one cold meal a day. And he felt if that continued for a long time, his health would be in danger, and he might not survive his prison term. His only way of getting a hot meal was to make friends with his prison guard. The prison guard wouldn't speak to him. He'd made many efforts to talk to him, and the prison guard ignored him. He learned that the prison guard had a strong interest in rugby. Nelson Mandela knew nothing about rugby, so he got books, magazines, and he learned about rugby. And then slowly but surely, he wore down the prison guard. They talked about rugby, and they became friends. Nelson Mandela went from having no hot meals a day to having 2 hot meals a day, and created an amazing connection with this prison guard, and they became friends long after he left the prison. Great leaders understand what needs to happen to make things work. Another thing I believe is very, very important is having someone you can trust insofar as they have your back. And there's a great book by Keith Ferrazzi about having your back, and I think it's well worth the read. But there's a story I like to tell, and this is a true story. This happened inside McAfee a little while ago. My boss actually was the main guy involved. He ran the engineering organization for the entire company. And we had a product or a service that failed. We had customers who were paying for this service, and they weren't getting it. The CEO was getting a lot of heat from our big customers, and he came to Brian and asked him, to explain what had happened. And he said, the service failed. When we looked at it, we found that the technology used to build it was actually quite old. The skill set that we had at the time is now gone, have left the company, and it's going to take us a few months to rebuild this and renew the service. So the CEO wasn't happy. He asked for a head. For those of you who don't work in multinational world, that means he wanted to fire somebody. So Brian said, fire me. And he said, well, why would I fire you? He said, because it's my fault. So these guys came to me a year and a half ago and explained that there was a risk here, that this could fail, and they wanted funding to build a new service. But I had lots of other projects on the table that I needed to fund, and I prioritized others ahead of this project. Now, needless to say, the CEO did not fire him. But when the story came out, everybody in the organization had so much respect because he put his head on the line. He protected his team. He had their back. He was my manager, and I absolutely knew that he had my back at any point in time. And this quote here, I quite like this a lot, and I don't know where I got it from. It says, leaders take care of you while you take care of business. So the leaders can't be experts in every single area. As you kind of rise up the ranks, your subject matter expertise disimproves. You have to trust people to do their job. So your job is to take care of your team while they take care of business. And also, leaders set the standards. If I see standards falling in my organization, it's because the leaders have taken their eye off the ball. And they've allowed people to get away with things they shouldn't. They've allowed quality to disimprove. And if you think about people in your own experience, sometimes as someone's leaving an organization, they kind of mentally check out. before they go, and standards start to drop. Leaders absolutely 100% withhold and set the standards for any organization. I like to cycle. Every year, I have a bunch of friends, and we do, cycling. We go cycling for a few days. This year, we cycled from the northernmost point of Ireland to the southernmost point. It's not as big as Chile, thankfully. It took us 4 days. And we cycle in a peloton. And if you haven't cycled before, you might see in the Tour de France, you've got this huge peloton of cyclists. And the guys at the front do all the work. If you're behind them, you're maybe using 30, 40, 50% less energy than the guys in the front. That's why pelotons are really efficient. But we, in a peloton, have to trust everybody else. Because if the guys cycling in a peloton do not know what they're doing, it's chaos. If you fall at 60 miles an hour, 60 kilometers an hour, you might not survive. So we have to trust people, and we have to work hard to ensure people have the right skill set before they can join the peloton. They start at the back, and over time, they gain our confidence, and then we allow them to take their position at the front. Because when you're cycling like that, your front wheel is literally an inch from the wheel in front of you. It's that close. So you have to have tremendous trust. But you have to build that trust. So as a peloton, as working as a unit, so you're building trust, much like you would do in a team. So the job, I think, as a leader, is to build trust. And the question I would ask people here is who do you trust? When I ask this question, and because my Spanish isn't very good, I'll assume you'll answer much like everybody else. And it's family. Your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters, your spouses. That's generally the answer that you get. Never your boss. Now, it's kind of interesting, right? What if you trusted your boss? What if in your top 5 people that you most trusted in the world, your boss is one of them? How much more would you do for them in a regular day? How much more productive would your organization be if they had that level of trust? And this is something we can work on. You can do 2 things. One is, as a leader, you can build trust in your organization. And then you can try and build trust with your manager. These things take time, and I'm not suggesting that we do it blindly. You need to trust people for the right reasons. You need to trust people to do the job with the skills that they've developed over time, the right people in the right job. But trust is something that you can build within your organization, with your management team, with your boss. And I challenge all of you to think about that and see, how much more productive would your world be if your boss was in your inner circle? Sorry. Wrong buttons. I've got 2 buttons. So now, mistakes do happen. This, to complete my cycling analogy, is when the guy at the front screws up, or the guy behind him screws up, and the whole peloton comes crashing down. But you have to create an environment where mistakes are allowed. If people work in an organization with a high level of trust, they will feel enabled so that they can take calculated risks and push the boundaries and try and build something special. And if you create that environment, you are absolutely 100% certain to be successful, to be innovative, if we listen to the last conversation. If the environment has a low level of trust, people will be afraid to stick their head up out of the water. They will be afraid to take risks because they won't know what the consequences are. They might feel they'll get fired. They might feel they're going to get into huge trouble in the organization with their manager. And those teams are very rarely successful. Change was mentioned a couple of times today, and I won't dwell too much on it, only to say that what's got you this far might not be good enough to get you to the next level. We have to change all the time. Some change is forced upon us. there are plenty of decisions that take place that we have no input into that affect us. So the last quote here by Charles Swindoll is one I like a lot. And he says, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. And leaders need to react positively to change. You're the guy who's setting the standard for your organization. And if you behave or react negatively in front of your organization, that has a very detrimental impact. So having the right attitude and being able to react positively to change is really, really important for your success. And the other thing that struck me is that, people have a natural tendency to offer advice. People's natural tendency all over the world is to be helpful. If you ask someone to help you out, they most likely will. And people will offer you advice along your way. On my journey, many people offered me advice. Fortunately, I took some on. And looking back on it, I ignored quite a bit as well. And had I been wiser, I would have been more reactive to that information. I remember an old HR manager, experienced guy, had been around the block a couple of times. And I was early on in my career in Microsoft, and I developed a bit of a reputation for being a troubleshooter. So I worked in the Windows organization. It was pretty mad back then. Microsoft was a mad place in the early days. And I used to solve problems, and I got rewarded for solving problems. He took me aside one day, and he said, how are things going? You're doing pretty well. The company's rewarding you. But he said, you need to be careful. He said, you're making a lot of enemies at the moment. He said, there's a lot of collateral damage. And I was so focused on the result that I had lost the ability to understand the impact I was having on other people around me. And he said, be nice to people because you need them on the way up. But he said, more importantly, you need them on the way down. That someone's going to trip you up if you don't change your approach. And it was one of the most important lessons I learned. I had lost sight of the impact I personally was having on everybody around me, on my team, on the people I was interacting with, and I was developing a reputation. And I had to change that. And I absolutely did. And today, it's a lesson. That information is stuck at the back of my head, and it's like, I captain paranoia. This guy, my inner sense comes out and tells me, at times that I need to listen to lessons I've learned along the way and advice that I received. Progress. It's hard to talk about a leadership presentation without mentioning Steve Jobs, but I'm not going to tell a kind of a traditional story about him. This is a video that I'm not going to show you the video either, but I'll tell you what happened. He made this recording years ago, and he talked about a time when he was still living at home. And there was an old grumpy man, a widowed man, who lived up the road from him. And he got to know him because he used to cut his grass, and he used to pay him some money. And one day, he said, come into my garage. And he showed him an old rock tumbler driven by a motor. And he said, go out into the backyard and pick out a bunch of rocks, just common standard rocks from my garden, and we'll put them in the tumbler. And he put in some liquid and some grit, and he turned the tumbler on. And he said, come back tomorrow, and I'll show you what's inside. And the next day, Steve Jobs returned, and there were these beautiful polished rocks inside the tumbler. So they had been bumping and grinding up against each other all night long, and in the morning, they were beautiful polished rocks. And he talks about this as a metaphor for a team, that unless there's some friction, unless teams bump up against each other along the way, they won't be successful. That the successful organizations will always have, and teams will have people who are challenging each other, bumping up against each other, tearing down ideas, building up new ideas. And the role of a leader in this instance is to know when to stir things up, but then when to let it simmer. And I think this is a really, really clever way of looking at a problem, because we have a tendency to assume that, everything's going to happen if we're all really nice to each other and we don't challenge each other. That's not the case. Friction is necessary. It happens, and in order to be really successful, a certain level of that is absolutely essential. George Bernard Shaw, I think, says it very well. He talks about the reasonable man adapting himself to the conditions that surround him. And the unreasonable man adapts surrounding conditions to himself. And all progress depends on the unreasonable man. I would encourage you to have unreasonable people in your organization. You need to have a mix of talent. Everybody can't have the same skill set. They can't have the same profiles. You need to have different personality types in your organization to be truly, truly successful. Now, we get to our journey. So we started a Great Place to Work 4 years ago. First year, we had low expectations. We thought if we learn enough from the survey, we'll be in a position to challenge for the list in a few years' time. But year one, we made the list. We were 17th best large company to work for in Ireland. And we weren't ready for it, but it was a nice experience. And from that point on, the employees who had been reluctant to engage got behind the program. They got a sense of pride from seeing themselves in the newspapers, for seeing themselves measured up against, in our case, it was Microsoft, Diageo, EMC, eBay, big multinational organizations. And here we were, in the same page, in the same profile, and it just validated that we were a great place to work. And then we continued the journey. Year two, we were 12th. And then this year, the announcement was made in February, we're the second best large company to work for in Ireland. And I won't talk too much about what goes on behind the scenes, because I think it's been touched on quite a lot. But today, 90% of our employees believe that Intel security is a great place to work. Everybody in Intel today knows that McAfee or Intel security in Cork, in Ireland, is a great place to work. Multinationals have teams all over the world who participate in this program. And when one site does really well, it gets noticed. It has national, global recognition. So we got incredible positive PR, within our own organization. We got incredible goodwill across the company, to the point where the leaders of our organization know they have to visit the site. They have to come and congratulate the staff for doing so well. So the executives flow through our office. The CEO, CFO, all these guys come to visit us. And that face time when you're working as part of a global organization is often difficult to get, but it's tremendously important. The methodology here, I won't go into too much detail, but what I will say is that we found there were things happening in our company that we weren't recognizing. When we did the cultural audit and we looked at the breadth of activity that was taking place, particularly around corporate social responsibility-led initiatives, we weren't giving them the right recognition. We weren't paying attention to them in the right way. And when we started to explore it in great detail, we discovered that there was a lot more value there than we thought. We had a program that was announced as one of the top 5 corporate social responsibility activities in Ireland this year, where we use our skill set, because we're an internet security company, and we go to schools to teach kids how to stay safe online. Very simple, using our skill set, we created a curriculum, and we go visit schools and we tell them how to be safe. Parents have come to us and asked us, how they can stay safe. And last year, a team of 350 people was able to teach 10,000 children across the country on their own time. Don't underestimate the power of good social responsibility-related activities, and find one that connects with what your values as an organization. You will get tremendous benefit from it. And just to prove the trust issue, as you can see, our trust scores have increased quite a lot. From 2012 to 2014, the high level of trust continues to increase, and then the low level of trust continues to go down. You can't be successful unless there's a high level of trust in your organization. And everybody in this room can do something about that. I had to go back to St. Brendan. So St. Brendan would not have made a good sailor if he adhered to this African proverb. Smooth seas do not make a good sailor. It's very important that boats leave the harbor. A ship in a harbor is a safe ship, but they're not designed for that. They're designed to go out into the rough seas. He would never have encountered volcanoes, icebergs, whales, had he stayed inside the harbor in County Kerry. So to go back to Steve Jobs' analogy, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. And what you get by achieving your goals is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals. That experience is transformational. And sometimes you don't realize it, but I think it's important that you pay attention and understand things, though that particular change as it happens. It'll make you a better leader. And 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by what you have not achieved than by what you have. So cast off your bowlines, leave the safe harbor, catch the trade winds, explore, dream, and discover. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you stay a few minutes
Sure.
with us? Because
Yes.
there are some questions for you here.
Okay.
I'll try to do my best in English. Yo voy a ir traduciendo algunas de las preguntas. Me las mandaron en inglés, muy bien. Bueno, algunas de las preguntas son, they want to know, what has been the greatest challenge or difficulty with an employee, and how did you deal with that? ¿Cuál ha sido la mayor dificultad que has tenido con un empleado, el mayor desafío, y cómo has lidiado con eso?
The biggest challenge I had was with an employee who didn't trust me. And he tried to undermine everything I did. And my mistake at the start was not dealing with the situation. He was a very smart guy. He was actually very well-intentioned. But I had upset him. I had inadvertently upset him, and I did not have his trust. So I understood after a while that it was my fault, that I was responsible for the problem. So we sat down and talked about it. And it took a few meetings before we were able to find common ground. And he turned around from being my biggest critic to in some ways being a real advocate for change in my organization. And it was a difficult time, but it happened when a project was not going well and everything lined up the wrong way, but we got it turned around.
And did he stay? Did he stay working with you?
No, he actually went on to greater and better things. As it turned out, he was tremendously talented.
And what was the problem there? It was, you spoke about being clear.
Yeah, the problem related back to recognition, actually. He felt I hadn't given him due recognition for successes that he had along the way, and that I actually recognized other people ahead of him. And he felt it was deeply unfair because he had done most of the work, which he had done, but I hadn't known at that time.
Another question. Dice, nosotros acá tenemos sindicatos muy potentes en la industria de la minería. ¿Cómo podemos construir confianza con ellos? We have very strong unions in the mining industry here in Chile. How do you think we can build trust with them?
So I'm probably not the right guy to ask that question because I have never worked in a company with unions, ever. All my experience has been with multinationals, and in Ireland, very few multinationals are unionized. And I think I've seen companies get into difficulty with unions. And I believe that I don't think a company themselves can take care of it, or industry. I think government has to be a big player in a solution. In Ireland, we've set up independent courts, labor courts, that work with the unions and interface between the unions and the employees, and the unions and the employees and the government. And that's been somewhat successful. But I think there's countries all over the world trying to tackle the union problems, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke about Alex Ferguson. Sir.
Sir, yes. As you can see, I'm Irish.
You said maybe his success is because he makes the changes while they are success, in the best moment. As a leader, how do you recognize when you are in a good moment that you have to make changes? Because many leaders think if we are having success this way, maybe we have to stay this way.
Yeah.
La pregunta es, él decía que Ferguson, el secreto del éxito era haber hecho los cambios justamente cuando estaban en un momento de éxito y así haber mantenido siempre en alto el equipo. Bueno, y la pregunta es cómo los líderes tienen que hacerlo para darse cuenta cuando tienen que hacer un cambio, porque cuando uno está en un momento de éxito, probablemente los líderes quieren seguir por el mismo camino pensando que ese es el camino del éxito.
Yeah, so it's not easy. Because when people are when a team is doing well, or an organization is doing well, everybody's getting rewarded, right? And the tendency is to take the easy option and reward everybody in that team, and not necessarily deal with performance. Because in any organization, there's always going to be some element of poor performance. But when a team is succeeding and growing at a tremendous pace, they tend not to look at that very carefully. And also, in my career, I've seen where projects are hot, or business area is hot, and money is thrown at the problem. And often it's spent poorly, because people are not asking themselves the right questions. They're just caught up in this whirlwind of success, and they're moving around at 100 miles an hour. They don't get a chance to really ask themselves the difficult questions. So trying to replace people in your organization who might have dropped their performance a little bit, bring in new talent, look for more unreasonable men. Rather than having success go on a curve like that, why not take advantage and go like this? And I think that's where leaders like Alex Ferguson, and you see some companies do it. Some companies have a constant policy where they turn over the bottom 5 or 10% of their workforce every single year. And I've been in organizations like that. So they're conscious of it, but it's something that it's hard. It doesn't go down well with people. If you're a company making $1 billion profit a month and you're cutting 20% of your workforce, not that that's happening at Intel, but if you were, there would be a lot of questions asked, right? It doesn't seem like the right thing to do. But yet, Intel and leaders of big organizations are looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road at what's coming next. And the success today probably has a time limit or time span on it.
Paul, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us and sharing with us your experience as a leader.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
A kiss for the goodbye.
I'll never turn that down.
Thank you very much.